The Pittsburgh Steelers may have just found themselves at the center of one of the most fascinating quarterback debates of the entire offseason, and it all starts with a player who was not even part of the traditional NFL draft process. Brendan Sorsby has suddenly become one of the most talked about quarterback prospects connected to Pittsburgh, and the reason is simple. Respected NFL draft analyst Todd McShay believes this young quarterback possesses the kind of physical talent that NFL teams simply cannot teach. That statement alone is enough to grab attention, but what makes this situation even more intriguing is how strongly McShay feels about Sorsby's potential. According to McShay, if all the right conditions are in place, from coaching to player development to psychological evaluation, he believes Sorsby is talented enough to justify using a first-round supplemental draft pick. That is an extraordinary endorsement, especially when discussing a prospect who remains one of the most polarizing quarterback evaluations in football. When you look at Sorsby physically, it becomes easier to understand why some evaluators are fascinated by him. At 6'3" and approximately 235 pounds, he possesses the frame NFL teams covet. He combines that size with impressive athletic ability and mobility, making him one of the better rushing quarterbacks seen in college football during recent years. He is not simply a quarterback who can scramble when necessary. His running ability is a legitimate weapon that can stress defenses and create opportunities when plays break down, but the athleticism is only part of the story. Sorsby also possesses impressive arm talent. He can attack every level of the field, drive the football into tight windows, and throw from multiple arm angles when pressure forces him off his spot. That creativity outside of structure is one of the traits that continues to separate him from many quarterback prospects. While some quarterbacks struggle when the original play collapses, Sorsby often looks comfortable creating something out of nothing. That ability has led some observers to believe his ceiling may actually be higher than several quarterbacks who have received more national attention. His natural playmaking instincts and pocket awareness allow him to extend plays while keeping his eyes downfield, something NFL teams place tremendous value on in today's game. For the Steelers specifically, there is another interesting element to this discussion. Sorsby operated extensively in an RPO-based offense during his time at Cincinnati. Because of that experience, many believe he could adapt relatively smoothly to offensive concepts that Pittsburgh may choose to utilize moving forward. The excitement surrounding Sorsby, however, comes with significant caution. For every argument supporting his upside, there is another pointing towards substantial risk. The biggest concern is that Sorsby remains a developmental prospect. His physical tools may be impressive, but his mental processing still requires work. Evaluators have questioned whether he consistently anticipates throws at a high enough level, and there are concerns about aspects of his pocket mechanics and footwork. Those issues are not uncommon among young quarterbacks, but they become magnified when discussing a player who could potentially cost a premium draft asset. Then there is the off-field situation. Reports surrounding gambling-related issues have become part of the conversation surrounding Sorsby's future. Those concerns have created additional uncertainty regarding his draft value and have forced teams to conduct even deeper evaluations. For any organization considering a major investment, understanding the player beyond the field becomes just as important as evaluating the talent itself. What makes the entire situation even more confusing is the conflicting information coming from respected draft insiders. McShay has indicated that league sources believe Sorsby could be selected as early as the second-round range. Meanwhile, other evaluations have suggested a much later projection, with some believing he could fall into day 3 territory. That discrepancy highlights just how divided NFL decision-makers appear to be when discussing his future. And that brings us directly back to Pittsburgh. McShay specifically identified the Steelers as a team that cannot be ignored in this conversation. His reasoning is rooted in a reality Steelers fans know all too well. Pittsburgh has spent years searching for its long-term answer at quarterback. The organization often finds itself drafting in the middle or back portion of the first round, making it difficult to acquire elite quarterback prospects without paying a significant price. Because of that reality, McShay believes Pittsburgh could be tempted to make an aggressive move if they truly view Sorsby as a future franchise quarterback. The logic is understandable. The Steelers currently have a structure that many young quarterbacks would dream of entering. A developmental prospect would not be forced onto the field immediately. Instead, he could spend time learning behind Aaron Rodgers while working daily with a coaching staff focused on refining quarterback fundamentals and mental processing. That environment could potentially maximize Sorsby's strengths while giving him time to correct weaknesses. At the same time, this decision is far more complicated than simply comparing talent levels. The Steelers already invested in Drew Aller. Any serious pursuit of Sorsby would naturally raise questions about how the organization views its previous investment and whether they would be willing to commit additional premium resources toward another developmental quarterback so quickly. That is why this story has become one of the most fascinating discussions surrounding Pittsburgh's future. The talent is undeniable, the upside is exciting, the risks are real, and the potential consequences of making the wrong decision could impact the franchise for years. As the supplemental draft approaches, one question continues to hang over the entire situation. If the Steelers truly believe Brendan Sorsby has franchise quarterback potential, would they be willing to take the gamble that other NFL teams might be too cautious to make? The reason many people around the league believe Pittsburgh ultimately stays away from Sorsby has very little to do with his talent and everything to do with the price that would be required to acquire him. When you start looking deeper into the situation, the Steelers are not simply evaluating whether Brendan Sorsby is a good prospect. They are evaluating whether he is significantly better than what they already have in the building. That distinction matters. If Pittsburgh were to use a premium supplemental draft selection on Sorsby, they would effectively be making two decisions at the same time. The first would be acquiring Sorsby. The second would be admitting that their previous investment in Drew Aller may not be enough to solve the franchise quarterback question, and that is a difficult position for any front office to put itself in. The Steelers already spent valuable draft capital on Aller because they saw legitimate upside in his game. While there are certainly areas where Sorsby may have advantages, particularly when it comes to mobility, playmaking instincts, and creating outside of structure, Pittsburgh must determine whether those differences are large enough to justify another major investment. That is where the risk becomes enormous. If the Steelers were to spend a first round or second round supplemental selection on Sorsby, they would essentially be stacking draft resources into two developmental quarterbacks. For a team trying to compete right now with Aaron Rodgers leading the offense, that is not a small commitment. The organization would need complete confidence that Sorsby offers a dramatically better chance of becoming a franchise quarterback. Anything less than that would make the decision extremely difficult to justify. From Pittsburgh's perspective, there is another factor that cannot be ignored. The franchise has traditionally been one of the most disciplined organizations in football when it comes to managing draft capital. The Steelers rarely make reckless decisions, especially when premium picks are involved. That philosophy has been part of their identity for decades. Because of that, many observers believe Pittsburgh would need to assign an extraordinarily high grade to Sorsby before even considering such a move. The front office would need to view him not just as a talented prospect, but as a potential long-term answer capable of transforming the future of the organization. The gambling-related concerns only make that evaluation more complicated. Even supporters of Sorsby's talent acknowledge that teams must thoroughly investigate every aspect of his background before making any significant commitment. When a prospect already requires substantial on-field development, adding off-field questions to the equation naturally increases the level of risk. That combination may ultimately be what pushes Pittsburgh away from making a serious pursuit. The Steelers can afford patience right now. They have Aaron Rodgers leading a roster built to compete immediately. They have a coaching staff capable of developing young quarterbacks. They have already invested in Drew Aller and can continue evaluating his growth behind the scenes. From that perspective, forcing another quarterback decision this quickly may not be necessary. That does not mean the organization lacks interest in Sorsby. In fact, many of the traits that make him attractive are exactly the traits Pittsburgh traditionally values. Toughness, athletic ability, size, arm strength, competitiveness, and playmaking potential all fit the profile of quarterbacks teams spend years searching for. The question is whether those strengths outweigh the uncertainty. What makes this entire debate fascinating is that there are very few middle ground opinions regarding Sorsby. Some evaluators see a player with special upside who could eventually become one of the most talented quarterbacks from his class if everything develops correctly. Others see a prospect with enough concerns to make investing significant draft capital extremely dangerous. That kind of divide is rare. Usually the league reaches some level of consensus on quarterback prospects. With Sorsby, however, the gap between his supporters and skeptics remains enormous, and that uncertainty may end up determining his future. If one organization falls in love with the physical tools and believes its coaching staff can unlock his potential, Sorsby could come off the board much earlier than expected. If teams become uncomfortable with the developmental timeline and surrounding concerns, he could slide much further than some projections suggest. For Pittsburgh, the safest prediction remains that they will continue building around their current quarterback room rather than making an aggressive move. The Steelers have invested time, resources, and belief into their developmental plan. Abandoning that plan would require a level of conviction that few prospects can generate. Still, this is the NFL, and quarterback evaluations have changed franchises before. All it takes is one team believing they have found the next special player. As the supplemental draft approaches and speculation continues to grow, Steelers fans will be watching closely to see whether Pittsburgh views Brendan Sorsby as a fascinating prospect from a distance, or as a quarterback worth reshaping the future of the franchise around. If that opportunity became available, would you be willing to sacrifice valuable draft capital for Brendan Sorsby's upside, or would you trust the Steelers' current plan and continue building around the quarterbacks already on the roster? While the quarterback discussion has dominated headlines, there is another storyline quietly developing around the Steelers that could become one of the biggest roster conversations of the entire offseason: the future of Alex Highsmith. A recent analysis identified two potential trade destinations for Highsmith, pointing to the Detroit Lions and the San Francisco 49ers as teams that could theoretically have interest in acquiring the veteran edge rusher. On the surface, the idea immediately grabs attention because Highsmith has been one of the most important pieces of Pittsburgh's defense for years. But once you start looking at the situation more closely, the possibility becomes far more complicated than simply finding a team willing to make an offer. According to the analysis, Highsmith's current market value could be something along the lines of a third-round draft pick plus a veteran player capable of helping Pittsburgh immediately. That sounds significant, but for a team with championship aspirations, the question is whether that package would actually make the Steelers better. And that is where the debate begins. The Steelers are entering a season where expectations are clear. Aaron Rodgers is on the roster. The organization believes it can compete. This is not a rebuilding year. This is not a developmental season. Pittsburgh views itself as a team capable of winning meaningful football games right now. When that is your mindset, trading one of your best defensive players becomes extremely difficult to justify. Highsmith continues to provide value in multiple areas. Most fans naturally focus on sacks and pass rushing production, but his impact goes much deeper than that. He has developed into a complete defender who can contribute against the run, pressure quarterbacks, and even drop into coverage when defensive schemes require it. That versatility is incredibly valuable. In modern NFL